Hey everyone. So, I 23 female need to vent about something that happened recently, and I genuinely don't know if I overreacted or if anyone else would have done the same. Grab some popcorn because this is a wild one. A few weeks ago, I matched with this guy on Hinge. Let's call him Jake, 25 male. From the get-go, our conversations were amazing. He was witty, had a great sense of humor, and we bonded over our mutual love for indie music and Italian food. He even remembered that I mentioned my favorite band was the Lumineers and that I'd always wanted to try this new Italian place downtown. Points for attentiveness, right? We chatted almost every day for about 3 weeks. Texts turned into phone calls that lasted hours, and I genuinely felt a connection brewing. So when he suggested we finally meet in person at that Italian restaurant I was dying to try, I was all in. He seemed thoughtful for picking a place he knew I'd love. Fast forward to last Friday night. I spent way too long picking out an outfit, settled on a cute floral dress that was flirty yet casual. I arrived at the restaurant a few minutes early because I didn't want to make a bad first impression by being late. As I walked in, I saw Jake already seated at a cozy table near the window, looking even better in person with his easy smile and a button-down shirt that brought out his eyes. "Hey, Emily," he greeted me with a warm hug. "You look amazing." "Thanks, you too," I replied, feeling butterflies. We sat down, and the ambience was perfect, soft jazz playing in the background, dim lighting, the works. We started chatting about our days, and I was thinking, wow, this might actually go somewhere. About 5 minutes into our conversation, Jake kept glancing over my shoulder toward the entrance. I thought maybe he saw a friend or something. Suddenly, he stood up and waved enthusiastically. "Mom, over here," he called out. I whipped my head around, thinking, did he just say mom? Sure enough, an elegant woman in her mid-50s was walking toward us, smiling brightly. She was dressed impeccably, carrying a designer handbag, and exuded the kind of confidence that fills a room. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, giving Jake a hug before turning to me. "And you must be Emily. I've heard so much about you." I was completely caught off guard. I stood up awkwardly, trying to process what was happening. Hi, nice to meet you," I managed to say. "Mom, this is Emily," Jake said, beaming. "Emily, this is my mom, Karen." Karen extended her hand, and I shook it, still in a daze. "I hope you don't mind me joining you too," she said smoothly. "Jake talks about you nonstop." I glanced at Jake, expecting some sort of explanation or maybe a punchline to this joke. But he just smiled and pulled out a chair for his mom. "Wait, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, Mom was just in the area and thought she'd stop by," Jake said nonchalantly. "It's no big deal." "No big deal." Was he serious? I didn't realize we were having company," I stammered. "Oh, don't worry about me," Karen said, waving her hand dismissively. "Pretend I'm not even here." Easier said than done. She sat down, and before I could protest, a waiter appeared with an extra menu. Jake didn't seem the least bit perturbed. In fact, he looked pleased. "Isn't this nice?" he said, looking between me and his mom. I forced a smile, utterly confused. Maybe this was some kind of family quirk, or maybe he was really close to his mom and thought this was acceptable. "So, Emily," Karen began, "Jake tells me you're a graphic designer. That must be so interesting." "Yes, it's a lot of fun," I replied, trying to be polite despite my discomfort. "Do you find it financially stable?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. I blinked. Well, it pays the bills," I said with a nervous laugh. "That's good to hear," she said, nodding approvingly. "Financial stability is so important these days." I glanced at Jake, who was sipping his water as if nothing unusual was happening. He caught my eye and smiled. "Mom loves meeting new people," he said, as if that explained everything. "Especially the ones my son is dating," Karen added, winking at me. "Dating? This was our first date." "Actually, this is our first date," I clarified, hoping she'd take the hint. I know," she said cheerfully. "But you can tell a lot about a person from a first impression." I felt my cheeks flush. This was getting weirder by the minute. Jake, can I talk to you for a second? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Sure, he said, still oblivious. What's up, in private? I insisted. He looked puzzled but stood up. We stepped a few feet away from the table. Is everything okay? He asked. Why is your mom here? I whispered urgently. Oh, she's just excited to meet you, he said, as if that was the most natural thing in the world. I told her about our date, and she insisted on stopping by. Jake, this is really uncomfortable for me, I said. I was expecting to spend time with you, not have an impromptu meeting with your mom. He sighed. Look, family is super important to me. If we're going to be together, you need to get used to that. Be together. I echoed. This is our first date, exactly, he said. No time like the present to start integrating you into the family. I stared at him, utterly speechless. Was this guy for real? Can we please just enjoy the evening? He asked, giving me puppy dog eyes. I took a deep breath, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to bail right then and there, but another part didn't want to seem rude. Fine, I said reluctantly, but this is really unconventional. We returned to the table, and Karen was already chatting with the waiter, ordering a bottle of their finest red wine. I hope you don't mind, she said as we sat down. I took the liberty of ordering for the table. Great, I muttered under my breath. So, Emily, she turned her gaze back to me, tell me about your family. Are your parents still together? Yes, they are, I replied, feeling like I was under a microscope. Any siblings? She probed. I have a younger brother, I said. How lovely, she said, although her tone suggested she wasn't that interested. Family gatherings must be fun. Yeah, we get together for holidays mostly, I said. Family is the cornerstone of a good life, she mused. Don't you agree? Sure, I said, reaching for my water glass. The waiter returned with the wine, pouring glasses for each of us. I took a generous sip, hoping it would calm my nerves. So, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Karen continued. Excuse me, I asked, nearly choking on the wine. Just curious about your life goals, she said sweetly. Jake is very goal-oriented, you know. I glanced at Jake, who was nodding along. Mom always says it's important to plan for the future, he added. Well, I hope to advance in my career, I said carefully. Maybe do some traveling. Traveling is nice, Karen said, but what about settling down? Marriage, kids, I felt my face flush again. I think that's a bit personal for a first meeting, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Nonsense, she waved me off. Better to discuss these things up front. Actually, I agree with Emily, Jake said suddenly. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But then he continued, maybe we should talk about our expectations, you know, so we're on the same page. I couldn't believe it. Was this some kind of intervention, a pre-marriage counseling session? Jake, I think this is moving a bit too fast, I said firmly. He looked taken aback. Really, I thought we had a connection. We barely know each other, I pointed out. That's what dating is for, he argued. Yes, dating, I emphasized. Not interrogations or family interviews. Karen sighed dramatically. I think someone isn't ready for a serious relationship. Maybe I'm not, I snapped. At least not with someone who thinks this is normal. An awkward silence fell over the table. Perhaps we should call it a night, Jake said quietly. Perhaps we should, I agreed, grabbing my purse. No hard feelings, Karen said, although she didn't sound sincere. Best of luck, I muttered before turning and walking out of the restaurant. As soon as I was outside, I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of anger, embarrassment, and disbelief. I pulled out my phone and called my best friend, Jess. Hey. How's the date going? She answered cheerfully. You're not going to believe this, I said, launching into the whole story. Wait, he brought his mom, Jess exclaimed. On a first date? Yes, girl, you dodged a bullet, she said firmly. That's beyond weird. Was I wrong to walk out? I asked, suddenly second-guessing myself. Absolutely not, she assured me. That's not normal behavior. When I got home, my roommate Lisa was on the couch watching TV. You're back early, she remarked. Date didn't go well, you could say that, I sighed, plopping down next to her. I recounted the entire ordeal, and her eyes grew wider with each detail. That's insane, she said when I finished. Who does that? Apparently, Jake does, I said. You did the right thing by leaving, Lisa said. Imagine what the rest of your relationship would be like. Yeah, like bringing his dad to our second date, I joked. We both laughed, but I still felt unsettled. The next day at work, I told a couple of coworkers about it during lunch. Most were as shocked as I was, but one guy, Mark, played devil's advocate. Maybe he's just really close to his mom, Mark suggested. Some cultures are like that. That's fine, I said, but a heads up would have been nice. Or, you know, not bringing her to a first date. Fair point, he conceded. Now I'm left wondering if I overreacted. Was I too harsh? Should I have been more understanding? Or did I dodge a major red flag? So, Reddit, am I the jerk for walking out on a date because he brought his mom along without warning? Update 1. When I left the restaurant that night, I genuinely thought that would be the end of Jake. I blocked his number, deleted our chat history, and spent the rest of the weekend laughing about it with my friends. Honestly, it felt cathartic to tell the story. Each retelling made it sound even more absurd. I was certain I had dodged a bullet and could move on with my life. But life has a funny way of surprising you. On Monday morning, as I sat at my desk scrolling through mails, I saw a notification pop up on Instagram. It was a direct message from Jake. Hey, Emily. I just wanted to check in and see if you're okay. I feel like the date didn't go the way either of us expected, and I'd really like to talk about it if you're open to that. My first reaction was to roll my eyes, seriously, after that disaster. But as I stared at the message, a small part of me was curious. He seemed genuine, at least in his text. Against my better judgment, I decided to reply. Hi Jake, thanks for reaching out. Honestly, I think we both know why it didn't go well. I wasn't expecting to have your mom there, and it completely threw me off. I went on a date with you, not with her. I hit send and immediately regretted it. Maybe I was too blunt. Maybe I should have just ignored him and moved on. But a minute later, his reply came through. I get that, and I'm really sorry, but I'm struggling to understand why it upset you so much. My mom is a big part of my life, and I thought it would be nice for her to meet you since I've been talking about you so much. I didn't think it would be a big deal. She was just curious about you. I felt my frustration bubble up again. Did he seriously think this was normal? But instead of ignoring him, I decided to explain exactly how it felt from my perspective. Jake, here's the thing. I was there to get to know you. That's the whole point of a first date. Instead, your mom completely dominated the evening. She asked me a ton of personal questions about my family, my finances, and even if I wanted kids. And you barely said anything. It felt like an interview, not a date. I wasn't prepared for that, and it made me really uncomfortable. I stared at my phone, unsure if I was being too harsh. But he needed to hear it. A few minutes later, his reply came through. I'm really sorry if it felt like an interrogation. That wasn't my intention at all. I just value my mom's opinion, and I thought it would be nice to introduce you to her. But I see now that I put you in an awkward position. I should have asked you first. I wasn't expecting that. For the first time, he seemed to really understand why I had reacted the way I did. Before I could even decide how to respond, another message came through. Can I make it up to you? I'd love to take you out again, just the two of us this time. No surprises, no interruptions. I promise it'll be a proper date. I let out a sigh, torn between feeling annoyed and slightly touched by his effort to fix things. Part of me wanted to flat out reject him. After all, the first date had been such a disaster. But another part of me wondered if maybe, just maybe, he deserved a second chance. He had apologized, and it seemed like he genuinely wanted to make things right. After a lot of internal debate and a lengthy chat with my best friend, I finally replied. I appreciate the apology, and I'm glad you're starting to see where I was coming from. I'm willing to give it another shot, but only if it's just the two of us this time. No moms, no family, no surprises. His reply came almost instantly, "Deal. Just the two of us, I promise." So, with a mix of hesitation and curiosity, I agreed to a second date. Jake suggested a new spot, a quiet coffee shop known for its cozy ambience and amazing pastries. He promised to keep it low-key and all about us. Now I'm waiting for the second date, and then I'll write the next update. I wonder what will happen there. Update 2. I went on a second date with him. You will be shocked by what you hear. Prepare to laugh. I am still in shock. I was cautiously optimistic as I walked into the little cafe Jake had picked for our second date. It was a cozy spot, full of warm lighting and shelves lined with books and plants. It smelled like freshly brewed coffee and cinnamon rolls, and it immediately put me at ease. Jake was already seated at a corner table, looking as handsome as ever in a casual button-up shirt. He stood up when he saw me, giving me that same warm smile that had initially drawn me to him. We exchanged pleasantries, and from the very start, the vibe was completely different from our first disastrous date. Jake was attentive and engaged, asking me thoughtful questions about my work and hobbies. He listened intently as I talked about a recent project at work, nodding and chiming in with his own experiences. He opened up about his own life, sharing funny anecdotes about his job and his favorite childhood memories. It felt natural, and for the first time since we met, I could see the person I had spent weeks getting to know over text. The conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about everything: our favorite movies, dream travel destinations, even silly things like our favorite pizza toppings. At one point, he made a joke that had me laughing so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. It was the kind of date I'd been hoping for from the beginning, and I found myself relaxing and genuinely enjoying his company. As the evening went on, I began to forget about the mess that was our first date. Jake was proving to be charming and thoughtful, just as he had been in our messages. I caught myself thinking that maybe I had been too harsh in my initial judgment. After all, people make mistakes, right? And he had gone out of his way to apologize and make things right. As the cafe started to quiet down and the night grew darker, Jake leaned in slightly and suggested we continue the evening at his place. He said we could watch a movie or just hang out and get to know each other better. The way he said it made his intentions clear. I hesitated for a moment, weighing the situation. A part of me was still guarded after the fiasco of our first date, but another part of me felt drawn to him. He had been great all evening, and I felt safe around him. Plus, I had come prepared. I had condoms in my bag just in case things went in that direction. After a brief internal debate, I decided to go for it. We left the cafe, and Jake drove us to his house, or what I assumed was his house. It was a charming little suburban home with a neat front yard and warm porch lights. I didn't think much of it as we walked inside. The interior was cozy and well-kept, and Jake guided me to the living room, where he set up a movie. The vibe was perfect: low lights, a soft throw blanket, and popcorn he whipped up in the kitchen. It felt like a natural progression of the night, and I was genuinely excited to see where things might lead. We sat close together on the couch as the movie played. Before long, Jake leaned in and kissed me. It started slow and sweet, but it quickly deepened, and I found myself leaning into him. I kissed him back, letting myself get lost in the moment. Soon, the movie was just background noise. Jake's hands rested on my waist, pulling me closer, and I let him. Before I knew it, my jacket was off and tossed onto the arm of the couch. And then, the light flipped on. It was so sudden, so jarring, that for a moment I thought there had been a power surge or that Jake had accidentally hit a switch. But as my eyes adjusted to the brightness, I realized it wasn't a malfunction. It was her, Jake's mom. Standing there in the doorway of what I had assumed was Jake's private space, her hands clasped together in an almost celebratory pose, her expression one of uncontainable enthusiasm. She looked thrilled, as if she had been holding back for hours and had finally decided this was her moment to step into the spotlight. I froze, completely disoriented. My mind went blank, struggling to reconcile what I was seeing with the situation I thought I was in. My jacket lay draped over the armrest. Jake's arm was still loosely around my waist, and the sudden reality of another person standing there as Mom, of all people, hit me like a bucket of ice water. My heart started pounding as I sat up straighter, suddenly hyper-aware of how close I was to Jake, how intimate the moment had been just seconds ago. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," she began, her voice brimming with excitement and not a shred of actual apology. "I just couldn't wait any longer. I'm really interested in getting to know you better, Emily." Her words were bubbly, almost giddy, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. She took a few steps into the room, her smile never wavering, and I realized with mounting dread that she wasn't just there to say a quick hello and leave. She intended to stay. My jaw dropped, but no sound came out. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving only her presence and the unbearable awkwardness that followed. For a second, I genuinely thought I was hallucinating. Maybe the long day, the coffee, the movie, and the wine had somehow combined into some surreal, stress-induced nightmare. That had to be it, right? Because surely, Jake's mother would not actually be standing in the doorway of his living room, no, his bedroom, inserting herself into our evening at such an intensely inappropriate moment. My brain was spinning, grasping for an explanation that made sense. None did. I turned to Jake, desperate for some sort of reaction, some indication that he was as horrified as I was. But what I saw made my stomach drop. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't frozen in confusion or scrambling to usher her out of the room. No, Jake was sitting there, looking sheepish and uncomfortable, sure, but not even remotely surprised. It was as if he had been expecting this, or worse, as if this was something that happened regularly. I swallowed hard, my voice barely steady as I managed to say, "Jake, did you know your mom was here?" He hesitated, his gaze flicking between me and her, clearly caught in a moment he couldn't easily talk his way out of. Finally, he nodded, lifting a hand to scratch the back of his neck in a gesture that made him look like an embarrassed little boy caught in the act. "Yeah," he admitted, his tone hesitant, like he wasn't sure how I was going to react. My stomach churned. It felt like the floor had shifted beneath me, like the entire evening, the cozy cafe, the easy conversation, the gentle kisses on the couch had been a setup, and I was the last to know. "What do you mean, you knew?" I asked, my voice rising slightly as panic crept in. "Why is she here?" Before Jake could even attempt an answer, his mom stepped forward, her energy practically buzzing, as she took over the conversation with the ease of someone who had clearly been waiting for her moment to shine. "Oh, I've been here all evening," she declared, beaming at me as though she had just announced the winner of a raffle. "I was at the cafe too, just at a different table. I wanted to see how things were going." Her words hung in the air, and my mind reeled. She had been there the whole time. My face burned as I replayed the evening in my head. The laughter, the light touches on Jake's arm, the vulnerable moments when I had shared details about my life and dreams, it had all been under her watchful gaze. I felt exposed, like my privacy had been completely invaded without my consent. I couldn't stop the flood of embarrassment and anger that welled up inside me. I stared at her, then at Jake, and back to her, utterly speechless. The room felt stifling now, the cozy ambience from before completely shattered. How could she do something like this? How could Jake allow it? I turned to him, my voice trembling with frustration and disbelief, needing to hear him explain this insanity. Desperate for any answer that could make sense of the situation. "You told me we were going to your place," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "This is my place," he replied, looking defensive. "I live with my mom." That revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. He lived with his mom, and instead of being upfront about it, he had brought me here under the pretense that we'd have the place to ourselves. Worse, his mom had been spying on us all night and had apparently been waiting for her moment to make an entrance. I stood up, grabbing my jacket and bag, feeling equal parts humiliated and furious. "You promised me we'd spend the evening alone," I said, my voice rising. "And we did," Jake insisted. "We were alone at the cafe. She was watching us." I snapped, gesturing to his mom, who was still standing there like this was all perfectly normal. "This is not okay." Jake looked frustrated but didn't seem to grasp the severity of the situation. "I kept my promise," he said, as if that made everything fine. She wasn't with us, she was just nearby. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like he genuinely didn't understand how inappropriate this was. His mom, meanwhile, looked completely unbothered, as if her presence was a gift I should be grateful for. I didn't waste another second. I grabbed my things and headed for the door. Jake called after me, trying to explain, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The whole situation felt surreal. As I drove home, a mix of emotions swirled inside me: anger, embarrassment, and disbelief. I couldn't believe I had given him a second chance, only for it to end like this. It was clear to me now that Jake wasn't just close to his mom. He was entangled in a way that made it impossible for him to have a normal, healthy relationship, and I wanted no part of it. When I got home, I immediately blocked his number and deleted his messages. This time, there was no second guessing, no wondering if I'd been too harsh. Jake and his mom had crossed every boundary I had, and there was no coming back from that. Lesson learned: if a guy brings his mom to the first date, run.